So today's Collaborate, we're going to cover blood vessels. And so you should have already this checklist. So here's our checklist. And remember what a checklist is. It's just a list of things you have to know. And so you can use it to write notes on. You can use it just to check things off. You can use it however you want to do it. But remember, these are the things you have to know for the lab test. And so if we look at this, we're going to talk about blood vessels. But first, we're going to talk about some general stuff about blood vessels. And so this is the general stuff about blood vessels. Here are the circulatory patterns. We've already mentioned them before. And then here are the structures of individual blood vessels, the layers of the blood vessels. And then we're going to show you some arteries and then show you some veins. Now, I wish that we could do these like one at a time, the way that I have it in the PowerPoints. But when you convert the PowerPoints to Collaborate, you lose that one at a time sort of ability. So everything shows up at the same time. And so we'll just have to deal with it. But let's look at blood vessels. So if we look at the general stuff about blood vessels, and if you're looking in your lab book, for most lab books, this is page 470. What you're going to see is a structure that looks something like this. So you're going to see this picture. And so if you look at blood vessels, you can see that they have layers to them. And so these layers are called tunics. And that's what we're going to see. You should also remember, though, that blood vessels are arranged in circuits. So a circuit is the reason it's called that is because it's a circle. And so there's actually two circles, two of these. And so if you look at this picture, you can see two circles. So the heart sits right here in the middle, and then there's two circles. There's one that goes to the lungs and then comes back to the heart. And then there's one that goes to the rest of your body, the head, the neck, all of that, your arms, your shoulders, and also the legs and feet and all that, and comes back to the body. So there are two of these circuits. One of these is called the pulmonary circuit. So the pulmonary circuit is the one associated with the lungs. And if you remember when we talked about the heart, this is the right side of the heart. So the right side of the heart, remember, it's a low pressure pump. It doesn't produce much pressure because the lungs are not very far away. And so when you look at it, we're going to see the right side of the heart. Here it is right here. This is the right side. And it's going to pump blood to the lungs. Again, they're not very far, so it doesn't take very much pressure. We're going to drop off our carbon dioxide here, and we're going to pick up oxygen here. And then it's going to come back to the left side of the heart. Come back to the left side of the heart. So that's one circuit. But there's another circuit as well. And this one's called the systemic circuit. So the systemic circuit pumps blood to the head, the neck, the arms, the shoulders, the legs. And so remember, those are distance, the long distance. Also, there's more resistance. And so this is the left side of the heart. And if you look at the left side of the heart, remember it's thicker because it's a high pressure pump. You need that high pressure to get it to where it's going because you're pumping against gravity, you're pumping a long distance, and so on. But when we look at this one, what we're going to see is it's the left side of the heart, and here's the left side of the heart right here. And so it's going to pump blood out to the tissues, so out to the head, the neck, and all that. It's going to pump against gravity. It's going to pump blood out to the arms and the legs and the abdomen and all that. And then it's going to come back to the right side of the heart. So we call them circuits, but they're really more like figure eights with the heart sitting right here in the middle. And it's really 2 figure eights. So it really sort of looks like that. Now don't forget that the heart has its own little circulatory system that just goes to the heart, and that's called the coronary circuit. Coronary circuit is part of this systemic circuit. Now you can't see that on the picture, but remember there are little blood vessels that come out of here. They're the coronary arteries. They're going to go around. They're going to go down the front. They're going to all that, but it just goes to the heart. And then there are veins. Remember they're called the cardiac veins. There's the great, middle, and small. And it's going to come back to this right atrium. There's a hole right in here, and the blood is going to flow into this right atrium. But that blood has only been to the heart muscle or heart wall. So that's the 2 circuits. Well, if you look at this, we have different types of blood vessels. So we have arteries, we have veins, and we have capillaries. And you can see all of these in this picture. Arteries, veins, and capillaries. Well, arteries are vessels that carry blood away from the heart. And it's a little bit easy to remember because artery starts with an A, and so does away. Artery, away. Now, most of us, when we think about arteries, we're going to think of them, at least in a picture, as being red. But remember, red does not mean artery. Red means oxygenated. So yes, some arteries are carrying oxygenated blood. This is an artery and it's carrying oxygenated blood. But look, the arrows go away from the heart. This is another one. Look, the arrows away. It's an artery, and it's red because it's oxygenated. But this is also an artery. Look, it's going away from the heart. But the color is not red, it's blue. Well, most of us, when they see blue, we're going to think of something like a vein, but blue does not mean that. Blue means deoxygenated, low oxygen blood. And so, yes, some arteries carry oxygenated blood, but some also carry deoxygenated blood. What makes an artery is that it carries blood away from the heart. Well, if we look at which ones are which, the systemic arteries are carrying oxygenated blood, and those are red. So we go back to our picture. All of these are carrying blood away from the heart, and they're red. Those are systemic. Look, they're not going to the lungs, they're going out to the tissues. But if we look at pulmonary arteries, and also umbilical, which we can't see in this picture, but pulmonary arteries, they're also carrying blood away from the heart, but they're carrying deoxygenated blood, and so they're going to be blue. And so if we look at this, look, it's going to the lungs. These are pulmonary arteries, but they're carrying deoxygenated blood, so they're colored blue. Does that make sense to everyone? We also have veins. So veins are just the opposite. They carry blood toward the heart. Toward the heart. So if we look at this, look, this blood is going toward the heart, toward the heart. But this blood is also going toward the heart. Now you can't see the arrows very well in this picture, but it's also going toward the heart. Now most of us, again, when we think of veins, we're going to think of them as blue, but again, blue does not mean vein. It means deoxygenated. And yes, there are veins that carry deoxygenated blood, but there are also veins that are carrying oxygenated blood, and those are going to be red. So if we look at these veins, they're carrying blood toward the heart. It's blue, so it's deoxygenated. Those are systemic veins.
Motion detected at the front door.
So systemic veins carry deoxygenated blood and they're blue. Remember, it's going to go toward the heart. But pulmonary and also umbilical veins are carrying oxygenated blood. So they're going to be red. So if we look at our picture, these are carrying blood toward the heart. Those are systemic veins. Systemic veins. But these, which are carrying blood toward the heart, are pulmonary veins. Make sense? Any questions? And then we have capillaries. Well, we're not going to spend much time talking about capillaries right now, but capillaries are tiny, tiny, tiny little blood vessels. They're so tiny that blood cells go through them one at a time. That's how small they are. Blood cells have to line up in a row to go through there. And we have tons and tons of these capillaries. If we add up all the capillaries and these other vessels in the average person, it's about 66,000 miles of blood vessels. 66,000 miles in a person, and that person only weighs about 120 pounds. If you weigh more, you're going to have more than that. If you weigh less, you're going to have less. And most of all of this 66,000 miles of blood vessels are going to be capillaries. But again, we're not going to spend much time talking about those right now. Okay, let's look at the structure of arteries and veins. So remember, arteries carry blood away from the heart. That blood is high pressure blood because it's coming straight out of the ventricles. Now it's more high pressure on the left side than it is on the right, but even on the right, it's still higher pressure than what veins have. And so if you look at an artery, it's under high pressure, which means that the walls have to be thick. So arteries have thick walls to withstand that pressure. Otherwise, they would just pop. They would rupture. If you look at veins, though, veins carry blood toward the heart. And when you get to a vein, the pressure in a vein is very, very low. In some veins, it's even 0. So it's low. That means there's hardly anything pushing against the walls. And so the walls don't have to be thick, and they're not. They're very thin walled. So if we look at an artery, look how thick the wall is here. It's that thick. But if we look at a vein, look, it's much thinner. It's that thick. Well, when we look at an artery or a vein, they have 3 layers. 3 layers. And the layers are called tunics. Tunic means coat. So they sort of have 3 coats around their thing. 3 tunics. There's one that's touching the blood. The one that's touching the blood is the tunica interna. Tunica interna. There's one that's outside. Outside. That's the tunica externa. Tunica externa. And then there's one in the middle. And the one in the middle is the tunica media. But they both have those 3 layers. And if we come over here and look at them, we can see the 3 layers. So here's the tunica externa. Tunica externa. Here is the tunica interna. Tunica interna. And then there's a middle layer, the tunica media. But look over here, this is thick, and this is over here thin. If we look under a microscope, we can see those layers. Now this one's an artery, but it's easy to the three layers. There's externa, there's media, and that little bitty layer right there that looks dark, that's the interna. And then here's the hollow space in the middle where the blood is. That's called the lumen. But three layers. Same thing's true for veins. They're not quite as easy to see, but you can still see them. There's the externa. There's the media. Look how thin it is. It's right there. And then here's the interna right here. And then, just like the other one, there's a lumen, and that's where the blood is. And you can even see the blood in there. Any questions? So can everybody find the three layers? Now, externa is sometimes called adventitia, but that's an old name and it's kind of going away. But you still need to learn it. But there's the tunica media, And then remember, interna is thin, thin, thin. And this one is this little wavy line like this. That's the interna. And here the line is not wavy. It's straight like this. That's the interna. Any questions? Now you may notice some other things in this picture. If you remember from A&P1, you can look at tissues. There's adipose tissue. This is elastic connective tissue. This is smooth muscle. This is simple squamous epithelium. We're going to have the exact same thing over here. Same layers. Here's a model that we have for our lab. And here's an artery here in the middle. On the side, these are both veins. But look how thick this wall is right here. It's that thick. Compare that to the vein, which is only that thick. So arteries have much thicker walls. And even in this low magnification picture, you can see that this tunica media in an artery is so much thicker than it is in a vein. Should be able to pick them out here in an artery and a vein. But notice something else here. An artery, because the walls are thick, if you take the blood out of them, they tend to stay round. Their walls are strong enough that they don't collapse. But look at the vein. The vein is so thin that if you take the blood out, relieve the pressure, veins tend to collapse. And so when you look at them under a microscope, arteries are almost always round. And veins are almost always flat or oval shaped. So here's our model again. Look, it's round. That's the artery. And oval or flattened, that's the vein. Well, remember we have three layers. So we should be able to pick out those three layers. Let's see if you can. Anybody know what this layer is? Tunica what? What is it? Tunica externa, exactly. And here, same thing. There's our tunica externa on the vein. And then there's the middle layer right here. What do you call that? Tunica media. Exactly. And here's our tunica media on the vein. And then here's our inner layer right here. And that's the tunica what? Interna. Same thing here. There's our tunica interna. So you should be able to pick it out on a picture. You should be able to pick it out on a model. You should be able to pick it out on a microscope slide. It's pretty easy. There are the layers. Any questions about that? Well, let's look at these layers a little more closely. So we're going to blow up our model. And look what they've done with this model. They've peeled away layers. And so to see the middle layer, we have to peel away the outer layer. So there's our tunica externa. There's the tunica media, and then we have to peel it away again to see the interna. So there's our 3 layers. Well, some layers have sublayers to them. And one of those is the tunica media. The tunica media has got sublayers to it. And you can see these things that look like this, they're almost like rubber bands. They are elastic fibers. And so they give this artery some stretch and recoil. And so they run up and down through this middle layer, this tunica media, like rubber bands. And then not only are there these rubber bands in here, but remember these cells that sort of like canoes or something, or a kayak, they look like this. Those are those smooth muscle cells. And so you can see the smooth muscle also. That's what all this red stuff is, the smooth muscle. So again, there's this elastic fibers. It's called the external elastic lamina. External elastic lamina. Well, not only does it in the front, it's all the way around as well. So we'll be able to see it also when we look further down here. But there's our 3 layers: externa, media, interna. So let's look at these sublayers of these vessels, or these tunics. Let's look at the tunica media first. So we mentioned them already, but what are these things? Well, not only are they here, but that's also what this is here, and what this is here, and what this is. That is this external elastic lamina. Lamina means layer, so there's sublayers. And there's our smooth muscle. So we have 2 sublayers in the tunica media. Make sense? Let's look at the tunica interna. It actually has 3 sublayers. 3. So see how these stripe things are going up and down like this? Well, there are also little ones right here going up and down just the same. So these white streaks that you see right here is also these elastic bands, but it's not external, it's internal. So this is the internal elastic lamina. Just like that other one was the external elastic lamina. So this layer also has these sort of like rubber bands to it. And then if you look at it, surrounding it sort of is some gray looking stuff. That is called the subendothelium. And basically what it is support tissue. It's a reeler connective tissue, if you remember from A&P1. And then it's supporting this layer right here, this layer right here, this layer. This is that simple squamous epithelium, and it's called the endothelium. So there are 3 sublayers of the tunica interna, and you can see them here. Any questions about that? And then if we look at the tunica externa, it doesn't have any sublayers. And so if we look at it on the model, the tunica externa looks like this. Here it is right here. And here it is right here. Now look, it's still got fibers running through it. And so there's a lot of elastic connective tissue here, but it's just spread out. It's not in a sublayer, because that's what this tissue is, elastic connective tissue. So tunica externa, no sublayers. Tunica media, 2 sublayers. Tunica interna, 3 sublayers. Well, look on here. We can see again those layers. So there's externa, no sublayers. There's the media, 2 sublayers. There's the interna, 3 sublayers. Any questions? So here's another picture showing those sublayers. Now if you look down here, this is not a blood vessel. This is dense, irregular connective tissue, so this could be someplace like the skin or someplace like that. This is a reeler connective tissue, so it provides this soft protective layer around the blood vessels. And then here's the blood vessels. Here's the blood vessels. And so they're surrounded. Again, we have 3 tunics, and then we have these sublayers. So this is an artery, and this is a vein, this is a vein. So arteries have these sublayers. Veins don't have the sublayers, no sublayers. So veins, they have the tunica externa, the tunica media, the tunica interna, but no sublayers. But there's something veins have that arteries don't have. And these veins have valves. And they're very, very similar to the semilunar valves in the heart. They look just like them, basically. All they are little enfolded areas of this tunica interna, this endothelium. And look, they look like little cups. And so if blood tries to go backwards, look, it catches on the cups and the valve closes. But if I push from this direction, the valve is going to open. And so if I look up here, you can see open valves. Here are closed valves. Make sense? Any questions? We go back to another picture. Let's be able to see the open valve a little bit better. There's the open valves. And all that does is the blood just pushes the valve aside, pushes it open. But when the blood tries to come backwards, it's going to catch on the little cups, and then the valve is going to close. So the blood can only flow in one direction. Any questions? So that's the general. So the veins have 3 layers but no sublayers. Exactly. So if we go back up here, remember we have these sublayers here, but look, you don't see anything like that with veins. They don't have these elastic laminae or anything like that. They just have the tunica externa, tunica media, and tunica interna. Anybody else have a question? Okay, well, let's look at some arteries and veins. So, anybody remember what makes an artery an artery? Why do we call an artery an artery? Which way does the blood flow? Away, that's right, away from the heart. And a vein, which way does the blood flow? Exactly, toward the heart. And so remember, because they're away, they're close to the ventricles, it's high pressure. And because it's high pressure, we're going to need thick walls. In general, arteries are deep structures. They're deep inside. They're not usually close to the surface. Now, there are a few places where they're close to the surface, and we'll see that where they're close to the surface, we can do what's called a pulse. Because what's going to happen with arteries and veins is the walls are going to bulge out as blood moves through them. And then they're going to squeeze back in between. And then veins, remember this, toward the heart. They're low pressure. And because they're low pressure, they're going to be thin. Remember, veins also have valves. Arteries do not. So let's look at some arteries and veins. Again, some of them are going to be red. Some of them are going to be blue. Red, remember, means oxygenated blood. Blue means deoxygenated blood. But still, no matter whether it's oxygenated or deoxygenated, the blood is going away from the heart. Veins, on the other hand, some of them are colored blue, some of them are colored red. Remember, oxygenated, deoxygenated, but veins carry blood toward the heart, no matter what kind of blood it's in there. So let's look at arteries first. So hopefully you have your checklist and you can just check things off as we go. Now, if you do this PowerPoint on your own and you do it as a slideshow, all of these arteries and stuff are going to pop up one at a time. And so when you see them one at a time, it's a little bit easier to look at them and do them. Well, we won't be able to do that, so you're just going to have to bear with me. But let's look at this. So here's the heart here. So here's the right side of the heart, and here's the left side of the heart. So there's 2 major arteries associated with the heart, one on the right, one on the left. The one on the left is this one, which is the aorta. And the aorta is a long artery. It keeps going, it goes behind the heart, and it keeps going on down. And so different sections of it have different names. So this section is called ascending because that's the direction the blood is going. It's going this way. But when we get here, look, it's making a curve. So that's called the aortic arch. And so now we're going to curve and we're going to head down. And as soon as you start heading down, the name changes again. It becomes the descending aorta. So ascending aorta, arch of the aorta, descending aorta. Make sense? But look, it keeps going, and it's going to go behind the heart. Now you can't see it here because it's behind the heart. It's going to go through the diaphragm. There's the diaphragm right there. Well, it's in the thorax, and so it's called the thoracic aorta. So it goes from here, it goes behind the heart, through the diaphragm right there. That's the thoracic aorta. And then we're not done yet, because now it's going to come out and it's going to go down the abdomen. So here's the abdominal aorta. And if you follow the abdominal aorta all the way down, it's going to split. Once it splits, its name changes, and it's not the aorta anymore. Any questions about the aorta? So ascending, arch, descending, thoracic, abdominal. Any questions? Okay, well, this is one vessel. And so all of these other arteries are going to have to branch off of it, or branch off of branches. That's just the way it works. We already talked about the first two branches that come off of here. They go to the heart. Remember, those are the coronary arteries, and you can't see them in this picture. But they're the very first two branches. But when you get up to the top of the arch, there are three branches. Three. The first one is on the right side, and it's the biggest of the three. It's called the brachiocephalic. And if you break the word down, brachio means arm, and cephalic means head. So the blood that goes through this vessel is going to go to both your arm and your head. It's a short vessel. Starts right here, and it only goes to right there. So this is the vessel right here. It's a short vessel. There's only one of them. Humans only have one brachiocephalic artery. Most animals have two. So if you look at something like a dog or a horse or a cow, if you look at the top of their arch, there are two brachiocephalics. Two. And when you go up, this is going to split this way, and that's going to go to the arm. It's going to split that way, and it's going to go to the head. Same thing over here. But sometime or another in our evolution, this artery right here did this. So now look, there's not two things on there, there's three, which is what we have. 1, 2, 3. So let's look at the middle one. The middle one, oh well, we'll come back to it, I guess. The middle one is this one right here, and it's going to go to the head. The one on the far left is this one. It's going to go to the arm. So look, this one is head and arm, and it splits, goes to the head, and goes to the arm. But remember, this one grew down. We'll come back to it. The other major artery that comes out of the heart comes out of the right side of the heart. The right side. Remember, the right side is a low pressure pump. It's going to go to the lungs. And so that vessel that comes out of there is called the pulmonary trunk. A trunk is something that's short and it's about to split. And you can see right there is where it splits. When it splits, we get two pulmonary arteries. And so each pulmonary artery is going to go to a lung. So the left one goes to the left lung, right one goes to the right lung. 2 pulmonary arteries. And they're going to divide again and again and again, and we're not going to learn those names. If we had more time, we might do that. So, pulmonary arteries. Let's go back to this now. So, remember, here's our aorta. There's our brachiocephalic right there. The brachiocephalic splits. One part goes up to the head. Well, on this side, there is no brachiocephalic, so this thing right here goes up to the head. The vessels that go to the head are called the common carotids. And there's a left common carotid and a right common carotid. So the right common comes off of the brachiocephalic. The left one comes off the aortic arch. So, brachiocephalic, right common carotid, left common carotid. If we follow those carotids up, there they are, and they go up the side of your neck. And if you put your hand on your neck right here, you can feel a pulse because the carotids are close to the surface right here. And so it's easy to find this pulse. And they're going to bulge out when blood gets pushed in, and then they're going to squeeze back in between heartbeats. And what you feel when you feel the pulse is you feel it squeeze and relax, stretch and relax. So there are 2 of these. Here they are. Well, if we follow them up to here, and you can't see it on this side, but if we follow them up to here, right here, they're going to split. So we're going to get 2 carotids now. One's going to go out to your face. So all of these vessels that you see here, that's for the face. But one of them is going to go inside the skull, and it's going to go to your brain. So when it splits, we have a internal, the one that goes to the brain, and we have an external, the one that goes to your face. And right here is where they split. You can't see it because it's covered up. Right there. Same thing's going to be true on the other side, but we won't be able to see it in this picture. But then we're going to go to the brain. So here's the brain inside your skull. And right there is that common carotid. Right there it is. Sorry, internal carotid. Right there. And then look, we're going to get vessels that branch off of it. Well, not only do blood vessels come up the front of your neck, they also come up the back of your neck. They come up through the vertebrae. And there's 2 vertebral arteries, one on each side. So these are running up the vertebrae. And if you remember the vertebrae, the cervical vertebrae have holes in them. Remember, they were called transverse foramen. Everybody remember that from A&P1? Well, what runs through those transverse foramen are these vertebral arteries. And then when they get up here, one comes up one side of the vertebra, one comes up the other side of the vertebra. They're going to join together. And what we're going to get is this vessel right here. So these are going to fuse into a single vessel. That's called the basilar artery. And then all of the vessels that nourish the brain and provide oxygen to the brain are going to come off of these arteries. They're going to come off the internal carotid. They're going to come off of the basilar. So let's look at those. So look, these are those arteries right here. There's our basilar. There's our internal carotid. But look at branches. There's a branch right there. There's a branch right there that goes like this. And there's the other side here. These are called communicating arteries. So this one's in the front. This is anterior. So it's the anterior communicating artery. This is more toward the back. This is posterior. And there are two posterior communicating arteries, two of them. So there's one right here and one right here. And then there are these arteries that branch out like this. And these arteries are called cerebral arteries. So there are three cerebral arteries. There's an anterior, there's a middle, and there's a posterior. Well, the anterior is on the inside. It's right here. So if we open up the brain, we see this anterior cerebral artery on each side. Now you can't see it in this picture very well, but there it is. It runs just like this one does. So it's on the medial surface of the brain of each side, the medial surface of each hemisphere. But there's also one on the outside. You can see a little bit of it right there. That is this one. This is the middle cerebral artery, right there, right there. The middle cerebral artery. And there's also one back here on the back side that runs on the surface. That's the posterior cerebral artery. Posterior cerebral artery. So those are the arteries of the brain. So let's review them again real quick. So remember, the biggest ones are these two internal carotids. There's one right there and one right there. You can't see them very well because they're coming this way up the neck, this way up the neck. They've been cut on this model. And then there are two vertebrals. Here's one vertebral, here's the other vertebral, and they're going to merge to form the basilar. And then the smaller arteries are going to come off of this. There's a smaller artery right here. That's the anterior communicating. And there are two smaller arteries right here. Those are the posterior communicating. And then all of the cerebral arteries are going to come off the rest. And remember, there's an anterior, a middle, and a posterior on each side. The anterior is in this middle or medial part of the brain. The middle runs on the outside. There's the middle. There's the middle. And then there's the posterior, which also runs on the outside. Any questions? Okay, let's go on back. So if we look at this, again, there's our aortic arch right there. And remember our carotids, we just looked at those. Those are the common carotids. One of them comes off this brachiocephalic. One of them goes all the way down, comes off of the arch of the aorta. But then we have the two subclavians. Subclavian means below the clavicle is what it means. So that's where they run. They run right underneath the clavicles. And they're going to run out to the arms. So there is a right subclavian and a left subclavian. And what's going to happen is it's going to keep going down the arms. Well, when it goes a little further down the arm, there's the subclavian. It's going to turn into the axillary. Remember, axilla means armpit. And so that's where it's going to go through, right through the armpit. And then it's going to go down the arm itself. And the upper part of the arm, remember, is called brachial. And so that's what this artery is called. It's called the brachial artery. And again, there's one on each side. If we follow it on down, our brachial is going to turn into these arteries. There's the brachial right there. When you get to the elbow, it's going to split. And it's going to run down beside these two bones. Remember, that bone is the radius. It's on the thumb side. And that bone right there is the ulna. It's on the little finger side. And so the artery that runs next to the radius is called the radial artery. And the artery that runs next to the ulna is the ulnar artery. Now there's also an artery here in the middle, but it's not on your checklist, but this is called the interosseous artery. That one you don't have to know. But that's those arteries. So go back again. We're going to start with the subclavian on both sides, axillary on both sides, brachial on both sides, and then we're going to see the radial on both sides and the ulnar on both sides. Any questions? So that's the upper appendage. Also the chest. And then, remember, our abdominal aorta is like this. It's coming down, and it's going to pass through the diaphragm. So there's our abdominal aorta all the way down as soon as it passes through the diaphragm. Well, look, there's a bunch of arteries that come off of this abdominal aorta. So let's look at these. So first of all, there's a little short artery right here. Remember, a short artery that's about to branch is called the trunk. If we looked at it from the side, it would look like this. A little short artery coming straight off of the abdominal aorta. And then it's going to branch. And it's going to have 3 branches that come off of it. So that little short artery, which is right there, is called the celiac trunk. And look, there are 3 branches. 1, 2, 3 branches. Those 3 branches, one of them is going to go up to the stomach. So it goes up to the stomach. It's called the gastric artery. One of them is going to go to the right, and it's going to go to the liver. Another name for liver is hepatic. And so this is called the hepatic artery. And then the third one is going to go to the left, and it's going to go to the spleen. And so it's called the splenic artery. So one more time. Trunk, very short, right here. That's the trunk right there. And if you could see it from the side, again, it sticks out just a little bit, and then it branches into 3 different things. So there's the trunk, there's the gastric, there's the hepatic, and there's the splenic, all off of this trunk. Now, if you notice, these divide again. Like you can see this division and this division, so on. We're not going to name those or worry about those. If you follow this abdominal artery, continue on down, we're going to get two more branches off of it. The first set of branches goes to the kidney. So here's a kidney, and here's a kidney. Another name for kidney is renal. And so these are called the renal arteries. So here's a renal artery, and here's a renal artery. If you go down a little further, we're going to get another set of branches. And these are going to go to the testes in males, and they're going to go to the ovaries in females. Well, testes and ovaries are called gonads. And so this artery is called the gonadal artery. Two of these, a left one and a right one. If we follow it on down, there's our abdominal aorta. We're going to get down near the legs, and it's going to split. And when it splits, one part's going to go down one leg, the other part's going to go down the other leg. Well, that first split, we get what are called the iliac arteries, the common iliac. Iliac refers to ilium, which is your hips. And so it's in the area where the hips are. So there's a common iliac. So here's the common right here. Well, if we follow it, it's going to split again. Same thing on both sides. And when it splits, the names are going to change. And we're going to have an external artery and an internal. So we have an external iliac and an internal iliac. So here's external, here's internal. Same thing over here. Here's external, here's internal. Well, follow the external on down. The external is going to go down the legs. So we can see it goes on down the legs. Well, when it passes out of the pelvis, remember that was ilium, its name is going to change. We're not going to call it iliac anymore. This is the femur. So it's running next to the femur, and so it's called the femoral artery. So common iliac, external iliac, femoral. If we keep going, the artery keeps going, but look, the bone ends. Right here's your knee. That's your knee. And if you remember what the back of the knee is called, it's called the popliteal area. And so the artery that's in the behind the knee is the popliteal artery. You can also call it popliteal. And then it keeps going. So there's the popliteal right there. And now it's going to keep going. And here is not the femur, it's the tibial. And so we're going to have two arteries. Behind the tibia is going to be the posterior tibial. In front of the tibia is going to be the anterior tibial, all the way down to the foot. So let's review that again real quick. So here's our abdominal. Follow it all the way down. It's going to split. Right here's where it splits. And we're going to get the two common iliacs. They're going to split. Right here's where they split. And we're going to get an external iliac and an internal iliac. we're going to follow the external iliac out of the pelvis. As soon as we leave the pelvis, it's now called femoral. We're going to follow it down the leg till we get to the knee. Behind the knee, it's called the popliteal. We're going to keep going. Now we're at the tibia. So there's two. There's a split that happens right here. And one goes down the back of the tibia, and one goes down the front of the tibia. So we have posterior tibial and anterior tibial. So those are our arteries. Any questions? Okay, let's look at veins. Remember, veins carry blood toward the heart. So when we talk about veins, because they're carrying blood toward the heart, we don't start at the heart usually. We start out here and go toward the heart, just like the blood flows. So veins start out small and they merge and they get bigger and bigger and bigger, just the opposite of what arteries do. But we don't have to start out outside when we name them. So let's look here at the heart again. So there's going to be veins that empty into the heart. So there's one vein that's emptying into the heart, bringing blood back from the arms and the head. And there's another vein that empties into the heart that's bringing blood back from the abdomen and the legs. And then here's another veins that empty into the heart that are bringing blood back from the lungs. So let's look at all of this. So this vein right here, and there's two of these, is bringing blood back from the head and the arm. Same thing right here, from the head and the arm. Remember, the word for head is cephalic. The word for arm is brachiocephalic. So we have two brachiocephalic veins. Remember, there was only one brachiocephalic artery, and that was this one right here. But there are two veins. So we have a right brachiocephalic vein and a left brachiocephalic vein. Here's the right one. Here's the left one. They're not very long. They are going to join together. We also have veins bringing blood back from the lungs. And the word for lung, remember, is pulmonary. So there are 4 pulmonary veins, 2 on each side. So there's this one coming back from the left lung and this one coming back from the right lung. They're going to empty into this left atrium. So there are 4 pulmonary veins. We said that they had these brachiocephalics. They're going to merge into this. This is the superior vena cava. So the superior vena cava is going to drain the head and the arms on both sides. And then we have this one, which is the inferior vena cava, and that's going to drain the abdomen and the legs. We're also going to drain the brain and the face. So from the face, we're going to have these veins. And they're going to come into this. This is the external jugular right here. The brain is going to come out of the skull, that vein is, and that's the internal jugular. Well, the internal jugular keeps going. It's going to go all the way down like this. The external jugular just joins on. So there's external, and here comes internal. There is no common jugular. Maybe we should name it that, but it hasn't been named that. But this is the internal jugular all the way from here. And it just keeps on going all the way down. Here's the other internal jugular. We're also going to drain the arms. And so here's the subclavian, remains the clavicle, and these are draining into it. And the ones that are draining into it are the axillary, and then the cephalic, and the basilic. We also have these down here in the abdomen. So remember, this was the spleen. So there's a splenic vein. There it is. This was the liver, which is also called hepatic. So there's a hepatic vein right here. It's called the hepatic portal vein. And then here's the stomach up here. And the word for stomach is gastric, so there's a gastric vein. Here's the kidneys. Remember, another word for kidney is the renal. So there's a renal vein. A renal vein. And then this vein is coming from the intestines. Now, it doesn't have the word intestine in it. It has the word mesentery in it. We haven't talked about mesentery yet, but we will when we get to the digestive system. Mesentery holds the digestive system in place. It also has blood vessels and nerves running through it. So it's not coming exactly from the intestines, it's coming from this mesentery. And that's it right there. It's a superior, but there's also an inferior. All of these drain into this inferior vena cava. And then if we look down in the legs, remember the blood's going this way. So we had an external and internal artery, a common iliac artery. We have the exact same thing with veins. So here's the external iliac vein, internal iliac vein, common iliac vein. And then we had a femoral artery. We also have a femoral vein. There's actually two femoral veins. One goes straight down, but one curls around the femur. Because it curls, it's called circumflex. So there's a circumflex femoral as well as a femoral. And then if you look down in here, remember we had a popliteal artery behind the knee. We also have a popliteal vein. And then there's a really long vein in the leg right here. Runs up the medial part into the femoral, and that's called the great saphenous. There's also another one over here which is called the small saphenous, but that one's not on your checklist. Any questions? So let's review the veins real quick and we'll be done for today. So again, draining the head and the brain are the external and internal. So the internal drains the brain, the external drains your face. It goes into this right here. There they are right there. There's the internal. So they're going to go into the brachiocephalix. And then from there, it's going to go into the superior vena cava. Draining the arm, we're going to have the cephalic and the basilic. They're going to go into the axillary, which is going to go into the subclavian, and then into the brachiocephalic, and then into the superior vena cava. Draining this, we're going to come from the spleen. We're going to come from the stomach. We're going to come from the liver. It's all going to drain into this inferior vena cava. Not only that, but we're going to drain the kidneys. We're going to drain the small intestines, top part, bottom part, all drain into the inferior vena cava. If you look at the legs, remember we're going to start down here. Saphenous becomes the popliteal, becomes the femoral, becomes the internal and external iliac, which becomes the common. There's also this little vein which makes this, comes around the head of the femur, the circumflex. Any questions? Okay, so that's all we're going to cover for today. I hope that you have already taken your exam, or at least made some sort of plan to take the 2 exams. Remember, you get to take both of them twice. But before you take the exams, go through the study questions, go through the narrated PowerPoints, look at the written review, and then take the exams. We're getting close to being about halfway through the course, and so you need to make sure you don't get behind.